after which I'll go ahead and open it up to questions. LANDFIRE mapping is supported by the LANDFIRE Reference Database, otherwise known as the LFRDB. The LFRDB is a vast database of georeference field data that describes plot-level vegetation and fuels. The LFRDB provides ground truth data for mapping and modeling vegetation patterns and conditions and for calibrating models developed by the LANDFIRE team. Let's see here. Data in the LFRDB are amassed from existing data sources, and we collect data through two main avenues. LANDFIRE circulates a yearly data call letter asking for contributions of vegetation and fuel plot data. This letter is circulated to agency heads into a list of data call contacts that LANDFIRE maintains. LANDFIRE also collects data through active searches of web-based data clearinghouses and agency corporate database systems. For example, we pull data from places like the MPS data store and the VegBank database system. You can find more information about the LANDFIRE data call on the LANDFIRE website, and I provided the address here at the bottom of the slide. The public LANDFIRE LFRDB includes a subset of the full suite of field reference data that was used in production of LANDFIRE National and Remap program deliverables. According to agreements between LANDFIRE and its data contributors, certain proprietary or otherwise sensitive data have been removed to create this publicly available version. Some examples of data that have been removed would include the Forest Service Forest Inventory Analysis, or FIA data, NRCS National Resource Inventory, or NRI data, and Bureau of Indian Affairs Continuous Forest Inventory, CFI data. Those are some examples of things that we aren't allowed to share, that we have agreements with these folks to use their data for internal purposes only. But the public LFRDB data does contain over 530,000 plots from 487 different sources. Some of the major sources of data in the public LFRDB include state inventory data, Forest Service vegetation and fuel plot data, National Gap Analysis Program data, and MPS inventory and monitoring data. If we look at who contributed data to the LFRDB, we can break it down by agency. This pie chart shows the percent of all public LFRDB plots that are accredited to the different agencies. As you can see, state agencies and multi-partner data sources make up a significant percent. Some of those state agencies actually come from, we got quite a high concentration of plots from Michigan and Florida. So kind of skewed the results to make a pretty big state agency contribution there. And then multi-partner data sources are basically ones in which more than one agency or group are responsible for the collection and or funding of the data. National Park Service and Forest Service are the other two big contributors, followed by USGS and BLM. The other category includes data contributions from the Fish Wildlife Service, non-government organizations, Department of Defense, and municipal entities. This kind of just gives you an idea of where the data in the public LFRDB are coming from. This is a map that shows the distribution of plots that are in the public LFRDB throughout CONUS. You know, as you can see, we tend to have a little more data out in the west, but we still have a decent amount of plots in the central and eastern portions of the country in the public LFRDB, but it will give you an idea of where our data are located. I also have a map of our own CONUS plot distribution. We do have a number of plots in Alaska and Hawaii, and we also do have some plots in the island territories of the U.S. Virgin Islands, America Samoa, Guam, the Mariana Islands. One thing to note about the data in the island territories is they do come from the National Park Service, so they will be concentrated on national park lands in those areas. Data submissions vary widely in sampling design and format, and data were collected for many different purposes and projects. A lot of time and effort is spent actually on converting, summarizing, and reformatting the data as needed, so it will fit into the LANDFIRE Reference Database standardized format. Throughout all steps of the conversion process, data are checked for information and spatial errors, and all plant species names are converted to NRCS symbol and scientific names. Once the data are all in a like format, it then can be compiled and information can be easily queried and summarized. LANDFIRE attributes the plots in the LFRDB with both ecological system and MVC group labels, so they can be used to inform existing vegetation mapping and modeling. Plots that have vegetation data are candidates for this labeling. For example, plots that have a list of species with percent cover measurements can be labeled using the Autokey program, while plots that have an existing vegetation cover type can potentially be crosswalked to ecological system or MVC group. The next two slides delve a little deeper into this process. The Autokey program is a Python-based program that compares lifeform and species cover information on a plot to sequence table criteria to determine what ecological system or MVC group should be assigned to each plot. There are different sequence tables for different Autokey regions across the country, so they can be tailored to vegetation types and species that occur in different geographic regions. The Autokey provides a consistent, repeatable method for attributing plots with vegetation types based on floristic composition. On the top left of this slide is an example of the type of data that can be run through the Autokey program. Here we have an example of plot data where there's a list of species and percent cover. And this is the type of information we need to be able to run it through the Autokey. For LANDFIRE Remap, NatureServe did update and improve the sequence tables for ecological systems, and they also developed new sequence tables for rural disturbed systems and for MVC groups. Over 250,000 plots in the public LFRDB were run through the Autokey program. Not all the plots receive an official label from the Autokey program. If a plot does not have a set of criteria that matches a sequence table, then it'll either not receive a label or it'll be labeled with an unclassified system or group, like an unclassified shrubland. In the public LFRDB, however, the majority of the plots, 86% to be exact, that were run through the Autokey did receive an ecological system and MVC group assignment. Plots that only have vegetation cover type labels are candidates for crosswalking to ecological system and MVC group. Plots must have a detailed enough cover type label to be successfully crosswalked. NatureServe used their expertise to crosswalk these cover type labels to ecological system and MVC group where possible. On the top left of this slide is an example of a cover type that was successfully crosswalked. NatureServe crosswalked over 220,000 of the plots in the public LFRDB. The public LFRDB was split into 9 different geographical areas, and the data are in access databases. We decided to serve the data in access database to make the information easily accessible to our users. However, because of the size limitations of access, we did need to split the data out into smaller portions. There are 6 geographical areas for CONUS: Northwest, Southwest, North Central, South Central, Northeast, and Southeast, and 3 geographical areas for OCONUS, the Alaska, Hawaii, and the insular areas that would include any data in the island territories. In each database, there are 11 data tables that characterize vegetation and fuels that are present within each plot, and there are 5 predictor tables that contain data that were extracted from ancillary layers and used as predicted data for mapping. There are also a bevy of lookup tables that help decipher any coded values within the data. The event ID is a unique identifier in all data and predictor tables, and it can be used to hook up the tables and query out specific subsets of data. Data tables characterize vegetation. These are examples of the data tables that are in the public LFRDB. The data tables characterize vegetation and fuels that are present within a plot. LANDFIRE has compiled data from many different sources and sampling designs, so there are many data tables and attributes to accommodate the wide variety of formats and to meet the mapping and modeling needs of LANDFIRE. Not all plots will have all the attributes listed in the data tables. In other words, a single plot will only have a subset of the available attributes. Some things to note about the data tables would be that the points and visits table will contain all available plots for a geographic region, but the remaining data tables will only contain plots that have that type of data. For example, the DT species table only contains plots that have species information. But anyways, this is a full list of the data tables that are in the public LFRDB, and I can quickly go through what type of information is contained in each one. Our points table contains plot location information. Our visits table contains basic sampling information, including things like sample date if it was available. The communities table contains data describing the plant community present within the plot. This is where you find your cover type labels. And this is also where you would find the ecological system and MVC group labels that LANDFIRE has applied to the plots. Our stands table contains plot level life form cover and height data. The species table lists the plant species reported on the plot along with their percent cover. Species height data is also included where it was available. Trees table will contain data describing individual trees measurements. Our seedlings table has counts of tree seedlings. Our exotics table contains cover estimates and present data for exotic plants on plots that are not included in the species table. These are plots that would only contain information on exotic species, so non-exotic species were not inventoried on these plots. And then we have a couple different fuels table, one that contains fuels data relevant to fire behavior modeling, and one that contains fuels data relevant to fire effects modeling. And then we also have a site changes table, which contains data describing any disturbance and treatments as reported by the source data. This graph shows the percent of public plots with the information about each of the main data types. As you can see, about 90% of the plots have some type of communities information, while 76% of the plots have stands data, which would be life form cover or height data. 47% have species cover data, and 10% only have information on exotic species. While about 4% of our plots have some form of fuels information, and 3% of the plots have individual tree measurements. Predictor tables contain data that were extracted from ancillary layers and used as predicted data for mapping. As such, different sets of predictor data were used for different regions, so not all plots will have all the attributes listed in the predictor tables. The full list of predictor tables in the public LFRDB are shown on the slide, and I'll quickly go through the information that is in each table. The ecoregions table contains data extracted from relevant ecoregion coverage and other geographical information. Gradients table has scaled integer data extracted from the LANDFIRE biophysical gradient layers, and it also has soils data extracted from various soils layers. Our imagery table has scaled integer data extracted from imagery relevant to the characterization of existing vegetation. The products table has data extracted from the LANDFIRE disturbance products from 1999 through 2006. And also it has the LF 2016 remap existing vegetation type and MVC extractions in there. And then we have a terrain table, which has data extracted from digital elevation models and its derivatives, and other terrain or topographic position layer. The public LFRDB is available for download on the LANDFIRE website. If you click on your geographic area of interest on the left, listed on the left here, you'll get a zip file that contains an access database and also a data dictionary that has detailed table and field descriptions. So anyways, you can go there to actually get the data, and that kind of wraps up my brief introduction to it, the LANDFIRE Public Reference Database. And at this point, any questions? You're welcome.
Yeah, I'm going to put that link in the chat window that you just put up there.
Okay.
I think I did it earlier, but just to make sure that everyone has it. So Melanie asked a question about the Autokey.
Yeah.
So does the Autokey adjust for differences in how vegetative cover was measured? For example, percent cover that sums up to 100% versus overlapping vegetation that sums to greater than 100?
No, what it does, it doesn't exactly adjust for that. No, you know, we have thresholds, life form cover thresholds, and then after that, for the individual species, we look at relative cover to really, I guess, bore down to what ecological system or MVC group is. So the relative cover might adjust to that to some extent, but we do know that lots of times our life form covers add up to over 100. That's kind of built into the process.
And Melanie, if you want to chime in or have another question, feel free to take yourself off mute and follow up. That goes for everybody. So if you'd rather just take yourself off mute and jump in, please do that for sure.
I also wanted to shout out to a question that Steve and Holly posted in the chat. Can landowners submit their own data into the LANDFIRE data bank to make it publicly available? Brenda, I should probably know the answer to this, but I don't remember how that exactly works. So I wonder if you could address that.
Yeah, so for data contributions, they can be sent directly to me, and that's how we kind of work them from there then. And then yeah, and when they are sent in, you can let me know if you want them to be publicly available, etc. And
do I remember right, Brenda, that they need to be geo-referenced, like somehow?
They do need to be geo-referenced, yeah. Okay. On our LANDFIRE website, we have a data contribution section on the website that will talk about kind of the minimum requirements for data submissions and the type of data we're looking for. Because not only do we look for data on vegetation and field plots, but we also look for events data, which would be disturbance and treatment data. So perimeters of where, fires or thinnings, etc., have happened.
So another question, how do we know if LANDFIRE has or has used the data that has been provided?
On our website, we do have a compiled data table that you can take a look at. And in there, it will list data contributions. It's kind of a beast of a table because we've had a lot of contributions. And there is a field that indicates whether or not it was, brought in, or if it wasn't used, like why it wasn't used. But if there are also specific questions, you can, of course, always contact me, and I can help answer them for you.
And so the data that we're looking at now that's available for download is current up to what date? I'm sure you mentioned this, but just to follow up on that.
I think the latest date that we have in there is like 2015 or 16, somewhere in there. So okay. It's what we collected for remap, and then we had to start processing. So
okay. And then when
we're one of the first steps in the I guess one of the first steps is getting our data out to the other mappers and modelers for use or whatever. So we start processing data pretty early in the process.
Okay.
And I think a tag on to Henry's question, Brenda, and again, this is Randy Swati. I'm with the Nature Conservancy's LANDFIRE team, folks. I should probably know this, but you may have said early on, but which LANDFIRE products does this feed into? I forget, you mentioned, I know it's early on in the process, but how does it kind of link to actually?
The data in here are used for EV, existing vegetation cover, existing vegetation height, and existing vegetation type mapping. So they're directly used for those. Some of the field data have been used in the past to help calibrate models and stuff like that. But so yeah, but mostly it's directly fed into our existing vegetation products.
So basically, I think what we always tell people is more plots equals more accurate data. And so we've tried to make a heavy push to encourage people to submit plot data. Yeah, so super important.
Yeah, definitely important. Yeah, and if anybody wants to get on our data call list, please, email me, contact me, and I can make sure you're on our list so you get our yearly data call letter.
I don't know if you can see this, Brenda. There's a couple other questions in the chat. And Melanie, I'm gonna read yours out. I think it's a really good one. Some other ones as well. Does a database for remap overlap with the database for LANDFIRE 1.0, or is it separate? What's the earliest year of the remap reference database? Great question.
Yeah, it does overlap. So it includes the data that we had in 1.0, and then just it adds to it. What we did do though is we did do more QC, etc. I can't say that every plot is included. And also, if we got new and updated data, or an updated version of the data, we took the newer data and replaced it. So maybe some of the older plots did get left behind, but in general, overall, it will include both.
So it's additive, pretty much.
Yeah, it's additive. Yep. Mm-hmm.
Okay. Then our friend Henry Bastian asked, what is LANDFIRE doing to either improve on the 10% of the data that does not make it through the autokeys? Are we reaching out to the data providers about those plots with the problems that may need to be updated or corrected so they are usable? And I'll tag on to that. What would be, I don't know an example of this, like what might not make it through your processing and what would be a kind of a hassle for you?
It hasn't been, I guess we haven't looked into it very in depth about what isn't making it through the keys per se, but sometimes there may be only 1 or 2 species recorded on a plot. And so like having a real small plot list makes it more difficult for it to accurately key out. So, it could be, just that particular plot didn't have very many species, or it could also just be, whatever purpose they collected for the data, they were only collecting, some of the more dominant species. And sometimes if we don't have enough detail there, then it makes it harder for it to key out correctly.
All right.
But we haven't necessarily all gone back to data contributors either.
Hey, Brenda, Corey here. Thanks for that presentation.
Yeah.
This is so timely because I just got into the LANDFIRE Reference Database yesterday for a colleague who wanted to know where Aspen was located in a certain area. So I ran into a question that I thought maybe you could help address, which is when I went into the database, I tried to join the plot location to the attributes that I wanted, which were the species and the ecological system assignment. Yeah. And then I brought it into ArcMap, so I would have the location of those plots displayed. And I ran into a little snag with getting it to, I guess, project right. So first I was trying to display the lat long coordinates, which I think are in decimal degrees. And that didn't work, but what I found was that the LFX and the LFY projected coordinates worked. And I was wondering if you could just explain to me what was going on there, if you know, or have any insight into that.
I don't know, I've mapped them using the lat long coordinates, and I've never had an issue with it. It's like projected in WGS 84 lat long. So I'm not sure exactly maybe what went wrong per se. Like I said, I have made maps using both to make sure they both work, and they seem to both do so on my side. So.
Okay, I thought maybe it was because I already had some LANDFIRE data in there. So maybe the projection was already set for the data frame.
It could be something like that, yeah. And you have to define the projection then. You'd have to go define it if you already had it in a data frame So that could be part of the problem there.
I thought that was kind of interesting, but because both the lat long and the projected coordinates were provided, I was able to find one that worked. So
that's good. Yeah. So if you already had, yeah, I'm sure that's why the LANDFIRE ones worked in for you. But yeah, you'd have to bring that in and then define that projection as WGS84.
Okay.
That long. So yeah.
And then my next question is, I would like to filter through the data to find plots that have been visited more recently. So can I find a date when the plot was visited in the database?
Yeah, that would be in the visits table. And, you know, we don't require folks to give us a data visit. So some of the plots in there will not have a date on them. But in the visits table, we have separate fields for year, month, and day, because, you know, sometimes we might only get a year the plots are visited. Sometimes we get a month and day. But that's where you'd want to look for more recent plots. And like I said, some of them won't have dates, but the ones that do, you could use to filter out for more recent ones.
Okay, awesome. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, we have a question from Craig that I think is really interesting. Are you considering using UAS derived plot multispectral as control plot submissions? And I'll tag on to this too. I wonder if you could tell us about any other remotely sensed plot collection techniques such as lidar or like that. But yeah, the question is more about UAS.
Yeah, we don't bring those directly into our LFRDB. Everything in there, we kind of keep to the more field visit type situations. We do use lidar and other aspects of LANDFIRE for sure, but they just aren't. It's not something that we collect and put into the LFRDB specifically.
I'm curious, this is reaching out a little bit, but I wonder if Henry, Frank, or Jim, or if anyone else from LANDFIRE is here, if you could describe how lidar or other remotely sensed data is used to help train our processing sort of as a complement to the plots. Maybe.
Pick one, Randy. You cast the net too far, so say myself.
All right, any other questions for Brenda or for any of us about LANDFIRE products, especially the reference database?
I have a question here that I'm looking at the database and I can share my screen if I need to. And I'm using the key ID or key variable to connect the stand table to the LANDFIRE zone. All I'm seeing here is the key in the LANDFIRE zone is the LANDFIRE zone column. And what would I be connecting it to stands to see how many stands are within a zone?
Event ID is the primary key in all the tables. So, the LANDFIRE zone is in the points table. So you can connect the points table to the stands table via event ID. Okay. And then you should be able to tell, which ones are in which, which plots are in which zones.
Hey, Mohammed, I feel like sharing your screen's a great idea. So why don't you go ahead and do it? I'm a visual learner. Like I didn't retain anything you just said, Brenda. I want to see. Okay. I want to see what he's talking about.
I was thinking the same thing. If you don't mind, Mohammed, thank you.
Yeah.
There you go.
Oh, great. Thanks.
Okay. So your question is connect.
I want to connect this table right here.
Oh, okay.
To this table right here.
Okay. Well, the LF zone. So what you need to do is you need to get the points table in there too. So the DT points table actually has the LF zone in it. That's just a lookup table. Anything that starts with an LUT is a lookup table.
I got you.
Okay, so if you need to know the name of the zone, you can use that table, but you can get rid of that table if you just want to know the zone number. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I got you.
So if you go down in the points table, there'll be an LF zone field. So then that should get you where you need to be.
Yep. I got you. And it has the event ID right here. I know I already connected it.
Yeah, exactly.
Mohammed, would you mind giving us a little brief overview of who you are, what you're doing, and what you're interested in finding out from this?
Okay, way to throw me under the bus.
No, I'm not under the bus. Come on.
Share your screen. Tell us about yourself.
No worries. My name is Mohammed Batani. I'm an associate professor of forest health at the University of Arkansas at Monticello. It's a little school, but my appointment is 70% research and 30% teaching. So I get to play a lot with data and go out in the field, collect data and stuff like that. I'm very much interested in LANDFIRE to feed into my research program that looks at fire behavior and fire effects on forest communities, upland hardwoods in general, and the West Gulf Coast kind of region. So zone 44 and 37, I believe, for LANDFIRE mapping zones.
Wow, outstanding. Thanks so much, Mohammed. Quick note, I'm from Little Rock. I grew up there. I went to school at University of Central Arkansas. So
awesome.
Yeah, I know where you're at.
Awesome.
We'll have to talk okra sometime.
Oh, I would love to. I'm really interested in using LANDFIRE data and contributing to it. We have several hundred plots that we can definitely contribute to in upland hardwood. And we have 87,000 tree measurements that we can contribute in the Arkansas, the Mississippi Valley area, actually.
Wow, outstanding, incredible.
Yeah.
So have you contributed data before, Mohammed, or do you need to know how?
No, actually, I have not contributed any data before, and I been looking at LANDFIRE stuff for a while now, but I've kind of never really dedicated time to just explore it a little more and use it a little more in my research project. So I'm remedying that gap.
Great. I will put a link in the chat for other folks that are interested in contributing data and how to go about doing that. So thanks for sharing.
Thank you.
There's a question about the LANDFIRE database that I want to call our attention to. And then also I'm really curious about the question that Lauren Miller asked. So Carl asked, is the LANDFIRE reference database shared as a file geodatabase? Can you get it that way?
No, the LFRDB is not a file geodatabase. So it's just a regular access database. We don't currently have it shared that way. So
all right, well, Carl, I'm gonna maybe throw Corey under the bus. Corey, I wondered, I just want to throw out the idea that maybe Carl, Corey and I could get on a Zoom if you like sometime, if you want to go spatial. I mean, I'm throwing Corey out there as an idea, but I would love to learn more about how to use it spatially, which I've never done. So
I can say it's not very hard. And so throw me under the bus, that's fine. We can map these points. It was not very difficult. I did have that one problem where I tried to project with the wrong coordinates, but it was just really easy to switch to other coordinates.
All right, then thanks, Corey. Thank you. Thanks, Carl, for that question. So we can make that happen if that's what you need, Carl. Maybe it's not, but Lauren asked a question that's been on my mind, and we can try to address it now, or I think we might be setting something separate up, honestly. Unrelated to the reference database, Lauren wonders about LANDFIRE streaming services. And I guess, Lauren, I don't know where you're at with this. I'm gonna throw my question out, like, how do you even do it? I have no idea. And I'm super curious about it, and I wonder if anybody here has used the REST, the WCS, other streaming services to get LANDFIRE data and can shed some light on this. And Lauren, feel free to unmute yourself and jump out with specifics if I didn't capture your question properly.
Right on. Can you guys hear me?
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, so I am using the map service, which I know when you add to a web map, it's essentially just a picture, there's no information behind there. And I am interested in using the fuel model service and having a user being able to click on it and bring up what the actual fuel model is. I'm not sure if that's, I know it's not possible with the ArcGIS REST service, but I don't know, before I dive down a deep hole on the WCS service, I'm not super familiar with that. I just want to know if that's even possible, and possible has to be within the Forest Service box that I sit in. You know, I gather it might be possible with some leaflet or, you know, some sort of custom products, but yeah, basically in the Forest Service box, looking to use your the streaming services, so a user can click on it and bring up, you know, this is fuel model X.
Well, Melanie, I have no idea, but I think what we can do is reach out to others, maybe Frank, Henry, or Jim, or anyone else. If we have a name of someone, we can connect Melanie to, sorry, Lauren to, then we'll do that. Also, this is not my favorite answer, but if you could drop the LANDFIRE help desk a line about this.
I did.
Okay.
They told me to Google it after a series of back and forth and some different, you know, some directions that applied to feature services and not map services. And then they said, Google it.
Oh, Lauren, are you in Bend? I'm in Bend, and I recognize.
Yes. I think I know you gave a presentation to Central Oregon Fire Management Services many years ago, but I don't think
it was like a different lifetime.
Yeah, that's probably more than a decade ago.
So really great to see you here. I do not know the answer to this. I do not use streaming services, but I have a colleague who does. So if you send me your email in the chat, I will try to see if we can work with another colleague to answer this question, and then I can learn something about streaming services, because I don't know anything.
I'd be curious if anybody else is interested in this on the call, because I love that we've identified a knowledge gap, and so potentially, you know, that could direct some things going forward. But if there's anyone else that's interested in this, and, you know, please let us know, or raise your hand, or do something so we know that others are interested.
Thank you. That is awesome. The you know, the color gradient, just because I'm looking at the fuel model grid in particular, the color gradient, I mean, it is what it is because there's so many options, but it's hard to differentiate, and since you can't click, it's tricky.
Yeah.
Carl's interested, you're interested, Randy, so we might be onto something. Craig.
Yeah, I might bog everybody now, because I would need a 101. I've never used this stuff before, so I would need to start from scratch. So maybe, yeah, we'll work to get that on office hour, maybe the next office hour, or we can set up a whole separate kind of conversation around that.
Awesome, thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Lauren. And also thanks for your story about the help desk. We want to make sure that I don't know, maybe, you know, if we exhaust all of our resources, maybe that's the best they can do is ask somebody to Google, but I know it's not very satisfying.
No, I have a feeling it's maybe not possible the way it's currently served up. So, and I don't think it currently inside my Forest Service box that I sit in. So,
yeah.
I mean, I think it's just there's so many nuances to services, and probably hard to provide an answer via email.
Agreed. Thank you. So I want to just circle back to a couple of things. Mohammed, I do want to reach out to you if that's okay, and we can talk Arkansas. I'd love to hear more about your work. And Megan and I will follow up on setting up something about streaming data. And if it's okay with folks, we might start with kind of a 101 and try to work up to something a little more complicated. And I really appreciate you, Mohammed, sharing your screen. And if folks come to that streaming services open office hours, we'd love to see your project and learn from you if you're willing. And also, I think, you know, I will encourage everyone to check out the links that Megan has put in the chat. You know, if you have plot data, let's follow Mohammed's lead and see if we can, you know, contribute, because that is probably the single single biggest way you can help improve LANDFIRE data is to send plot data. We take other types of feedback as well, but it's really key.
We still have about 15 minutes. So does anybody else have a question that we haven't addressed? Please feel free to unmute yourself and let us know.
I have a couple more questions, if that's okay.
Sure.
So I'm wondering if Brenda can explain more about how the autokeys work. To me, it's a little bit of a black box between here's this data set of species composition or percent cover, and then the autokeys are producing an assignment of NVC type or whatever the other one was called, vegetation type or something like that. And specifically, I'm wondering if the Autokey program includes any quantification of certainty of the assignment.
Yeah, I can talk a little bit more about how they work. So, we do have to do some calculations on the data to get it ready to go through the autokeys. One of the first breaks in the autokey it looks at is life form cover. So it wants to know the percent of trees, shrubs, herbaceous, perennial herbaceous material. Also, I think conifers in there. So anyways, it looks like different breaks in those. So basically, it's a table that has a bunch of criteria. So if it matches some criteria, then it gets, put into that box. So the first break would be looking at the life form covers. And then the second set of criteria are, that's the first one it looks at. And then the second set it will look at is the species on the plots. And that's where the relative cover comes in. So we'll look at relative cover thresholds for certain species. So if the plot has that, makes the cut for the life form covers and has the species at the correct relative cover, then it will be labeled with that ecological system or MVC group. It also takes into account some ancillary type data layers, including things like elevation and landform and some other things. So some criteria like that are also associated with the different, ecological systems or MVC groups. We have different sequence tables that give us an ecological system assignment and a different sequence table to give us an MVC group assignment. But that's kind of the, the first breaks it goes through. So it's basically just a list of all these criteria. If a plot meets it, that's what it is. If it doesn't, it looks at the next, set of criteria, and it kind of goes down the list, right? And if it doesn't meet any of those criteria, then it gets spit out as either not labeled or as unclassified system. So hopefully that helps explain it a little bit better. And the program just, basically compares, it's all set up into a database, and it compares the inputs to the sequence table to get us assignments in the end.
And Melanie, I'll let you know too that we do have an assessment of the quality of those auto keys. The sample size is not great, but we do have one which I could provide for you for each auto key region by type. So that could be provided to you if you want it. We don't post it on the website. Very few people have ever asked for it. But if you would like to see it, certainly you can let me know and I will make sure that you receive it, because I hold those myself, so I do have them.
Yes, that would be really helpful. I appreciate that. And I appreciate the explanation for how it works, Brenda. I realize you have some documentation of that posted on your website, but I just haven't had a chance to work through everything yet.
Yeah. And if you want more information about it, feel free and contact me, and I can send more information your way too.
I can add a little bit to that, Brenda. This is Carl Nordman with NatureServe, and when we went through and worked on these, it was an iterative process. We probably developed and ran these 20 or 30 times at least for each of the mapped unit areas that we worked on. We'd get a report, compare how the plot's classified to, what we knew about the vegetation, redo it, tweak it, improve it. So it was a lot of work went into developing their it as an iterative process.
Thanks, Carl. Good to meet you.
Anybody else have any last minute questions? Well, not really last minute, but any other questions for Brenda or any others on the call?
No questions, but I'm going to see if you can hear me now. Can you hear me?
Got you, you got you, Henry.
Yeah. So to Randy's earlier, hey, call us out, and to Craig Thompson's question about lidar, in UAS. So we are taking a look at some of that. To Brenda's point about, is it physically within the LANDFIRE Reference Database? The answer is correct. No, not yet. Relative to the future of how some of that may play out, LANDFIRE is currently using lidar as part of the national lidar, acquisitions of where there's lidar available, because it is not wall to wall, across the entire country. But lidar has been super helpful and beneficial in mapping height and cover, where it is available. And it is in LANDFIRE 2016. So when you look at those products where lidar was available, it contributed to the improvement of the quality of the products there. And then as we're looking to the future, this will be good just for this entire group. We do want to talk with Craig a little bit more, because Craig, he sits in the Office of Wildland Fire, is doing a lot with UAS. And so relative to fire physics-based models and new modeling where we want to go, UAS could play a very important role relative to data in thinking about, hey, how can we get some of those types of lidar type products in areas where lidar is not available, and UAS may be able to provide a stopgap or a measure to get us in that area. So just for awareness.
Thanks, Henry.
And Brenda, I have a couple of questions since we have time. How often do you expect to update the public LFRDB? Is that annual or biannual or by version or what?
I think that still remains to be decided to some extent. So far, we've only put out 2 of them after our major mapping, processes. So we did one for LF National and then one for LF Remap. It probably won't be quite annual. I'm not sure. It could be. We're looking into options for more of a continuous remap situation. So I guess we'll have to see what the future brings.
And then the second question is, what other types of data do you collect on behalf of LANDFIRE?
We also collect events data, which would be any type of perimeter where a disturbance or treatment has happened. And we look for anything from like wildfire, insect disturbances, weather disturbances. And as far as treatments go, we look into any type of harvest or thinning, clear cut treatments, mechanical treatments, mastications, even reforestation treatments. So we collect perimeter data on that, and that's processed into our events geodatabase. And those disturbances and treatments are used to update our map layers where disturbances and treatments have happened. So we definitely are interested in that type of data. And then, we have also collected lidar data that we discussed already that was, used for some of the structure mapping. So.
Thanks, Jim.
Great.
I just noticed that I said next time December 2nd, but next time our next informal office hours is October 28th, not December 2nd. So sorry for that mistake, but we will be talking about the LANDFIRE disturbance layers with Inga Lapuma on October 28th. So please come back to these opportunities to learn more about LANDFIRE, talk to the experts. You can see we don't just have Brenda on the call, we have people with all sorts of expertise that are here for you. And that's our goal for this hour that we spend once a month. So last call for questions. Otherwise, this meeting was recorded and it will be put on our YouTube channel in the next 48 hours. So keep an eye out for that if you're interested. Brenda, would you be willing to make the slides that you created available for folks?
Yes, I can definitely do that.
Okay, awesome. I will make sure that those are distributed to the registrants and you know where to find them. And no more questions, anybody? All right, take the poll. Have a great rest of your week. We will see you October 28th at our next informal office hours. And thank you so much for joining us. It's been a great opportunity for us to interact with all of you and learn the knowledge gaps and learn how we can better serve our LANDFIRE community. Thanks again, Brenda, and everybody who participated.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.